And we're live. It is Monday, January 6th, a day that is freighted with infamy and violence and American carnage. You see what I did there, Holly? 8 o'clock a.m., the year of our Lord, 2025. It is snowing in the Washington metropolitan area, and that means we're all supposed to freak out. Ready? Okay. Now we freaked out. That's all the freaking out we're going to do about snow. Shane is texting me. Do you have a link? And the answer is, why, yes, of course I have a link.
Well, while you're doing that, let me just share that I am extremely gratified that my dog, who's sitting in my lap, did expel his bodily functions outdoors this morning, even though he hates water, he hates snow, he hates cold, and yet I got him to. And I didn't have to go outside. He went outside. I made him go outside.
And this is the content we are all here for.
It is dog shit daily.
Dog extra.
Why not dog shit daily?
Once it was dog shit daily. When
said you couldn't do that.
When a neighbor threw dog shit at me. And if you look up dog shit daily on and in the spirit of anything for content, I thought immediately when she threw a bag of dog shit at me, wow, that's good content. All right, Shane Harris.
Hi.
We are here to talk about bacon. No, not bacon this time.
Not again, although I could.
Although I want to tell you about the bacon. We keep a kosher kitchen here in Washington, D.C., so I cannot make the bacon here, but we are heathens at the cabin in the woods. And the other day, we received a delivery at the cabin in the woods of appliances. And on the 9th, all those appliances, including a refrigerator and an oven, are going to be installed. And the very first thing I am going to attempt to cook at the cabin in the woods is the bacon.
I love this for you. I love that your Manichaean approach to religion is going to result in you,
I need a cabin in the woods where I can do whatever I want.
The cabin in the woods is a dephiladelphil thing, and all the rules are suspended at the cabin in the woods.
Is the cabin in the woods still the same cabin, though? Philosophically?
It is. Okay. It is. We did not rip down the outside of it. We only ripped. It looks exactly the same from the outside.
Okay. Here's a question for you, either one of you. So now that I'm not a I have no desire to smoke pot. But now that I'm not a federal worker anymore and don't have to take polygraphs on the regular, I am interested in just a gummy, just one.
I am in exactly the same position. I am.
Let's do it.
I am a pot virgin, and
me too.
And I've just never, now that I don't have kids to raise anymore and tell them, be an example, I would totally break federal law with you.
It's against the law.
It's against federal law. It's against federal law. But do you have to? So here's the thing. Now that it's legal in most states or many states, is it still a question that is asked that, can get you in trouble with your clearance?
100%. Yeah.
I was interviewed the other day for somebody else's clearance, and they asked me about it.
Well, let's talk about somebody whose security clearance is ongoing. Mr. John Ratcliffe. Shane, I am old enough to remember, and it feels like so very long ago, when John Ratcliffe was the worst nominee Donald Trump was capable of.
I remember that too.
And I remember writing a whole bunch of stuff about how dangerous John Ratcliffe was, and I remember that we were that it was like one of the important moments when he withdrew the first time that he was nominated, and then he got nominated again and he got confirmed despite my pointing out repeatedly that this was not an acceptable nominee.
Yeah.
And I remember taking that very personally. And now John Ratcliffe gets nominated and everybody responds that, including me, by the way, that he's the good one. Like, not the good one, because that's Marco Rubio, but he's like, there's like, Marco Rubio is the Trump administration we wished we would get. And then there's like Pam Bondi and John Ratcliffe, who were like the Trump administrations that, it could be worse. We could have Cash Patel and Matt Gaetz. And then there's Pete Hegseth and Robert F. Kennedy and, Tulsi Gabbard, which are the ones we actually need to worry about. And so I want to start with the question, how did John Ratcliffe go from being the bad one to the good one, or the tolerable one, without changing his stripes at all?
Because it's all relative. And we should point out, too, I mean, so people aren't confused, that the first time when he was the bad one is, in the year 2019, in the first Trump administration, when he's nominated for DNI, and he is the nominee for all of 5 days before he pulls out his nomination after failing to secure, obviously not Democratic support, but key Republican support, because, they felt that he had no credentials to speak of. And maybe you want to talk later about like why you thought he was so problematic. So why is he acceptable now? One short answer is he has been the DNI. It took 2 tries to become the DNI, but he did get it, and he served in that role for 8 months. Not in an insignificant period in American history. I mean, it was during the pandemic. He was also the DNI during an election. Put a pin in that because that comes back to his political story. He is not fundamentally changed in any way. He is still a partisan loyalist. He is still somebody who has a view about the Russia investigation that frankly amounts to conspiracy theory in a lot of it. But he has served in a role. He is the only person, by the way, from a senior national security leadership position, as in an agency head, from the first administration who is coming back for the second. And when you compare him next to the other national security nominees, with the exception of Marco Rubio, he looks like an elder statesman. So, I mean, time changes everything is the answer to this, I think. Because what time has not changed is John Ratcliffe. He is still the same person he was when he was the DNI, and now will be in a much more powerful position because for all the reasons that we just discussed, he will be confirmed. I mean, absent some just shocking revelation, I don't even know what it could be at this point. He will be confirmed. Again, unless they found out that he was smoking pot, maybe.
I don't think that would stop him. I think it would have to be smoking toad.
I don't even think that was
I don't know. The toad lobby is really
that
strong.
Would make him more interesting.
It sure would. All right. So we welcome the estimable Ev Gaumond. Ev, reserve some time at the end of the show today. We gotta have a little conversation with you about the Canadian government falling. So maybe we'll even run like 5 or 10 minutes long today. All right. So here's my second question about John Ratcliffe, which is, unlike, as you mentioned, the flip side of his being the only one who's coming back is that he's actually got some real experience, which is not true a bunch of the others. He was an assistant U.S. attorney in some, non-trivial counterterrorism capacity. He was a U.S. attorney acting for the better part of a year. He's been a congressman and he has been the DNI for, 10 or 11 months or something. 8. And that's not, I wouldn't say, a good background to be CIA director, but it's not a ridiculous background to be CIA director, which is a position that people will recall once housed a securities lawyer. And some people with motley backgrounds have been CIA director. I guess my first question is, what kind of, in terms of the nuts and bolts of being DNI, what do we know about his performance as DNI?
Well, what stands out is that he was nakedly political in the position in serving the interest of Donald Trump. I can say some words if you want about his management of the role of DNI, and I'll do that.
Yeah, I mean, let's start with the stuff that we should expect him to be relatively normal about, and then go on to the stuff that, raises real concerns.
Yeah, well, look, okay, so one thing I think he's fairly normal about is there was nothing... He's not Cash Patel in that I think that he's not...
Damning with faint praise there.
Well, I could count up on a couple of hands the number of U.S. and foreign officials while I worked on this story that were like, well, at least he's not Cash Patel. I mean, it became a refrain. He's not someone... I hesitate to say that I don't want to say that he's not going in to attack the bureaucracy, because he actually might very well be, and he harbors a lot of suspicion about career intelligence analysts and particularly people who work on the China account.
Intelligence analysts are a problem. So
yeah, we're gonna come to that in a moment.
But he's
Holly.
not sort of like hostile to them in the way that Cash Patel is, where he's written a book called, Government Gangsters. I mean, I want to be careful about saying he's not Cash Patel. He has a lot of qualities of Cash Patel. It's just a very different package, and in some ways, it's a smoother package. He is a very skilled lawyer. He's a very good arguer. I think what you can expect to find is somebody who will make it his concern less about managing the agency, which is to say kind of doing what I think Mike Pompeo did, right? Which was to come in and essentially say, I am here to run this agency, and of course I'm on board with the president's policies, but basically you guys are the experts, do your thing. I mean, Mike Pompeo, who also had no real relevant national security experience, he was a member of Congress that was very concerned about Iran and some other foreign issues, and he had served in the military and gone to West Point, but that doesn't, John Ratcliffe had more on paper experience and more in the room experience than Mike Pompeo. And Mike Pompeo succeeded because he came in and basically told the operators, do your thing, and I'm not going to mother may I the whole business. Whereas I think Ratcliffe is more likely to come in and really start second guessing people. And you saw this most vividly when he was DNI in 2020, when the intelligence community was working on a classified assessment of foreign election threats. And they were looking at China, they were looking at Iran, they were looking at Russia, principally those three countries. And China...
Sorry, I just muted you for a second by mistake.
Yeah. So
start again.
Yeah, so you're going to see him second guessing people, is my thinking, and second guessing in the sense this way: when he was DNI, he got into it with the China analysts because he felt that they were not taking a broad enough view of all of the malicious activities that China does in the United States, from lobbying state and local officials to theft of intellectual property to all the various intelligence work that they do in the United States, which is significant. I mean, you can go read a lot about that. He felt that kind of amounted to election interference, whereas the China analysts, most of them, not all of them, felt, look, we understand those are influence operations, but China is not trying to pick a winner in the presidential election. And that's what we're looking at when it comes to election interference. They're trying to maintain stability with Washington. And Ratcliffe is saying, no, you're looking at this too narrowly. And the analysts are saying, you're inserting your political views because what you want to do is make China seem like the big threat, so Russia seems like less of a threat because Russia pisses off your boss. And this kind of all erupted into plain view in 2020. And he didn't back down from it. I mean, he wrote publicly about his views while he was the DNI, after he had left the office, and has really maintained that it's the role of the DNI to, when he sees the analysis being off or misguided, or in his view, he feels like it was politicized because these China analysts were basically, in their mind, like saying, let's not help the Trump administration by making China seem worse than it is. There's some evidence that maybe they were doing that, by the way. He got involved. And, and as I write in my Atlantic story about him, it's not that what he did was, completely objectionable. I mean, it is his right as the DNI to come in and sort of weigh in on these things. It's very hard to do that without being a political operator and advocating for the political position of your boss. And that inevitably gives a political and a partisan gloss to everything that you're doing as the Director of National Intelligence. And I just think that is a very historically dangerous ground to tread on. And I suspect that he will happily tread on it. He's not afraid to get into these controversies. He's not afraid to debate the people who work for him. A different DNI would probably try to come in and smooth over the differences and come to some sort of resolution to present to people what they felt was really going on. Ratcliffe sort of took the other tack, which was to attack the people he disagreed with. And I'm using that word attack rhetorically, by the way. There's no evidence that
he just changed their outcome.
Well, he added information to it, yeah. In a way that many of them complained to an ombudsman was a gross misrepresentation of what they were trying to say. But he didn't try to get anyone fired the way C Patel probably would, try to get people fired.
Right. So, Holly, I happen to have a former CIA analyst who served during this period right here, and she's you. And I am curious what this sounds like to you. So we're talking about the certainty of confirmation of a guy with, I would say, non-trivial experience that includes changing or adding to in a fashion that analysts, like, say, you, regard as a gross distortion of their work, but who's not C Patel and who's not, evidently a crazy person. So from a Holly 3 months ago point of view, do you look at a Ratcliffe as a manageable problem from a CIA analyst point of view, or do you look at it as an erosion that leads to the slippery slope that leads to the collapse of civilization, or somewhere in between?
Well, as we've said, everything's relative, and after the administration, the second administration after the first coup is that people get serious about their jobs at that point, and the office is really, the weight of the offices really take hold after the coup attempt.
I mean,
anyway,
but you guys survived Mike Pompeo, and
Mike Pompeo was just an ass. That was his main issue. I just to add a few atmospherics, and again, just a disclaimer, this is just my impressions and opinions. It's not CIA official.
Right. When Holly is here, she is speaking on behalf of the CIA. Everything she says should be attributed fully and completely to Mr. Burns.
Yeah. So from an analyst perspective, the DNI position might be more of a just routinely, apart from politics and Trumpism, um, the DNI, there's routine tussles with the DNI over analysis, particularly in the PDB, and some of it all, and much is reported to the ombudsman for politicization, because we're trained as analysts that any sort of attempt for any reason to influence or misconstrue or change analysis by management, is, it may not be politicization, but it's reportable as such, and that's something that we're conditioned to. And I, again, even in the Biden administration, just, I know of one case in particular that I want to go into detail, where it wasn't political per se, but it was the DNI. An official in the DNI had a particular position, and was pushing that, and a lot of it's sort of bureaucratic tussles. So him as CIA, and what he did, I think, was obvious, nakedly political. It wasn't just a bureaucratic thing. But as director of CIA, as an analyst, I haven't seen it as much where the director sort of weighs in on analysis that much. I've seen it more on the DNI side. I think as director, I think the concern would be more in terms of operational security and releasing information and sources. The director does a whole lot with foreign intelligence heads and services. There's a robust relationship there. And, the director has enormous influence in terms of what is shared and how those relationships go. And so that being politicized, I feel like is actually more dangerous in many ways. I mean, much of what the CIA does and all of the cover concerns and, wearing disguises and all the crazy crap that we do, it's all about protecting the sources, really, at the end of the day. It's not really about protecting ourselves. And so having a director that, and I think Shane in the article talks about an instance of that memo being released, and it wasn't that the information was explosive, it was that it revealed sources and methods, and that Gina Haspel, the director at the time, was very opposed to it and quite livid about it. So I think that's more of the concern versus swaying the analysis. But he could do that too. The director certainly can do that. So.
Yeah. And do you have a sense, Holly, of what the reaction among your former colleagues to Ratcliffe? Is it the sigh of relief?
Yeah.
At least he's not Cash Patel, or is it the, Absolutely. Oh my God, this guy again?
No, it's definitely relief. I talked to Shane earlier, but overall, and again, this is my impression, and I'm not going to go into specifics, but overall, like, my impression just globally on the second Trump term, the first one, there was open concern expressed. There were, leaders and managers, held meetings where they were sort of allowing people to be, express concerns and be trepidatious the first time. And the second time, it's been more resigned, I would say, and less tolerant of, and, granted, after the election, I had to go to work in 2016 the next day. I was actually at the farm. But this time I actually took the rest of the week off because I was like, I can't deal with this atmosphere. So I don't know what happened in the immediate days after, but from what I heard, it was pretty much business as usual. And then Ratcliffe, it's been more like, well, this is a known quantity. We don't expect, it's very blasé. It's very like reassured, like even in terms of just the transition itself, and the sort of changes involved in any normal transition. The sort of tone has been like, we've seen this before. Like, he's coming back. Trump's coming back. It's like, no surprises. We don't expect any surprises, which has frankly been got concerning to me. I mean, privately, a lot of concerns, but in terms of like the overall tenor of things, I it's I found it concerning. I found it a disconcerting, personally, and Ratcliffe's definitely not. Nobody's concerned that I've heard. I mean,
So,
probably,
so,
again, privately is different.
so Shane, that actually fascinates me because, like, normally as a journalist, you run for the ambulance, right? The ambulance chasing in a lawyer is considered distasteful. Ambulance chasing in a journalist is considered doing your job. But here, you sought out the least controversial of the security nominees. And the question is, why the journalistic choice to focus on him rather than Kash Patel or Tulsi Gabbard or the ones who people are actually freaking out about?
Because while they're all freaking out about those people, everyone is ignoring John Ratcliffe, and he is going to be the next director of the CIA. And I am not sure that Kash Patel will be the director of the FBI. I'm not sure that Tulsi Gabbard will be the DNI. I am fairly confident that they will not both get their jobs. So, in journalism, sometimes you do the opposite, particularly in magazine journalism, which is where you go where they ain't. And no one was paying attention to John Ratcliffe for all the reasons that we've been discussing. It's like, yeah, known quantity, he'll be confirmed. He's not so bad. And yet he is going to be the most powerful individual in the United States intelligence community. The CIA director is a much more important job than DNI. DNI, yes, is technically his boss, and the DNI can declassify information, as Ratcliffe did, to enormous controversy. But he is going to oversee covert operations. He is going to know, if he wants, he could demand to know the identity and locations of spies. He will, as Holly said, be the primary interlocutor to our foreign liaison partners who are quietly freaking out right now about not just John Ratcliffe, but about the panoply of officials that have been Trump plans to nominate. And as I write in my story, many foreign officials have told me that they're taking steps to begin to protect how much classified information they share with the U.S. intelligence community. So to me, it was right about John Ratcliffe, because John Ratcliffe is going to be in this very powerful position. And I think in some ways he's more interesting because, Kash Patel is interesting on his face because he's Kash Patel, right? And he just says unbelievably wild things and writes children's books about Donald Trump. And it's just, he's just bizarre. It's a freak show. John Ratcliffe is not like, the bearded lady or, the snake girl or something. He is a lawyer from Texas who was a Tea Party conservative who, because he is really good on TV and said what Donald Trump wants to hear, became the director of national intelligence and now will be the director of the CIA and the only person in history to have both jobs. And I think there is something to learn about what it takes to get ahead in Trump land by studying John Ratcliffe. He is a masterclass in what it takes to get ahead and stay on the good side of Donald Trump.
All right. So here's my, I think question that we should ask about every single Trump administration appointee, and we often don't, which is, does he believe any of it? What part of the John Ratcliffe story is a story of cynicism and opportunism, and what part of the story is a story of true belief and movement, whatever? What part cynic? What part? I don't know what to call it. True believer,
performative, and or true believer. So in every magazine story, really any news story, really any magazine story, it always has to start with one question. And the question that this one started with was, how far is John Ratcliffe willing to go? And we even put that in the top of the story. But what always emerges when you're writing a story is the second question. And for me, the second question was, does he believe all this stuff that he's saying? And I did not interview him. I requested an interview. He declined. So I can't really speak to what's in his head. And even when you interview somebody, it's very hard to speak to what's in their head. But I would have had a chance to ask him this. I come down on the side that I think it's probably mostly performative. I have a line in the story where I talk about how, Ratcliffe kind of came to prominence as a freshman congressman from Texas by spinning this theory in TV appearances and in committee hearings that the Russia investigation was somehow engineered by Hillary Clinton. And his story is, it all starts with the Steele dossier, and the Steele dossier was funded by Hillary Clinton and the Democrats, ergo the Russia investigation is a Democratic political operation, yada, yada, yada. And that's just not true. It's just objectively false. And he is not a dumb person, and he knows it's objectively false. Like, he has not failed to notice this in the past, 4 or 5 years in which this information has been established, including by a bipartisan Senate committee investigation run by Republicans, right? It started with a
We always call it the Rubio report.
The Rubio report. Now, he likes to run to the Nunes report and the House version of the report and whatever. That's fine. But he knows all these things, right? He knows these things that there's objective fact that Republicans agree on as well. So I come down on the side of, I think that he knows it's not really true, and he is arguing the other side of this for maybe political gain. I totally allow that he believes that there is intense politicization in the intelligence community and is deeply concerned about it. And I could see him arguing this almost like a litigator sort of takes a position to sort of expose what he believes is the truth or the wrongdoing. But, it's one thing, I think, to be a member of a congressional committee and doing rigorous oversight and maybe taking tendentious points of view and arguments that, are really meant more to elicit a provocation, and then to be the DNI and start declassifying information allegedly about Hillary Clinton, concocting the Russia investigation when, what he declassified had absolutely nothing to do with that. I mean, the only justification for this memo that he declassified that I can see is that it had the name Hillary Clinton in it. And it was immediately picked up as a campaign device by Trump, and it was mentioned in the debate. And again, he is not a stupid person. He knows that's what's going to happen. So I think it's performative largely. I can't be sure, obviously. But I asked the same question about Cash Patel, right? And I look at Cash Patel and I'm like, for real? Like, really? Like, when you lay your head down on the pillow at night, this is what is actually in your consciousness?
Yeah, but I think Cash Patel,
it almost doesn't matter, but
I think Cash Patel's an easier case. I mean, he is obsessively interested in people who crossed him at different times.
He's vindictive.
He has a real quality of somebody who is obsessive, and Ratcliffe seems a bit more like a professional.
Yeah, he's like a lawyer who, he is more a lawyer who wants to help his client win an argument than he is an intelligence advisor who wants to help his client make a decision. And if he were the latter, he would behave more in the traditional mode of an intelligence leader, but he is the former. And I think when you kind of view him as a lawyer, and I actually interviewed someone who worked for him, who is a current U.S. official, who enjoyed working for him, an intelligence official, and had nice things to say about him, who said he's a lawyer and you need to remember that when you brief him. And I think this is kind of how to think about how he views the world and approaches it, is through the lens of a lawyer. And it's about debate. It's about taking a position sometimes, maybe one you don't even really agree with, to try and, get at what the truth is. And again, that's all fine and good. But when it starts spilling over into rhetoric and declassification that could expose sources and methods and things that do real damage, or potentially do damage, you're in a different terrain. And you don't get to just say, oh, I'm just asking questions. Like, no, you're declassifying information about, how we spy on the Russians. It's qualitatively different.
All right. Holly, Ev, do you guys have questions?
Ev?
No, go ahead. You're the one who's really invested in the CIA.
Yeah, I just have a kind of a global question for you, and also Ben. Also, I'm sure you have a perspective as well. My sense, looking at the CIA historically and also more recently, I mean, I would say the culture is definitely wanting to serve the president. Like that's the ultimate aim. And I think, the excesses, the past excesses and embarrassments of the CIA have generally been the result of executive abuse of power and overreach, or like the whole torture situation. That was a administration policy that the CIA carried out. And I don't know, I don't want to I know of many people, of my colleagues who, certainly in the analytic cadre, if they saw something, they would, if they saw something and were concerned about something, they would speak up through the proper channels. But the overall culture of the place, I have to say, is not, it's apolitical, but that cuts both ways, like it's apolitical. But in the Trump era, that's political. So I don't know. I just have I do have real concerns that there's going to be a go along to get along. I do think there's a red line I would hope there would be a red line for on the ops side when and if sources were really being endangered. Yeah. But I do think that sources were endangered in the first Trump administration too. I don't know that for a fact, but that's been my impression.
I think you're right about, the agency. I mean, it exists to serve its customers, right? And there is no more important client than the president. The director reports directly to the president. And I think that, it also wouldn't shock me if Donald Trump wanted to get rid of the DNI altogether and go back to the way things were before there was
I'd actually be fine with that.
I think a lot of people would, actually. And that might be something that he tries to do to maybe help him win some favor in the intelligence community. But I think your point is well taken, that a lot of times, there is this desire to serve the policymaker. But there's also, you could look at, torture is a great example where I think that there were many people in the CIA who felt, we need to implement these, aggressive interrogation tactics. And there were clearly people who felt, no, we don't. And that burst into public view. A name that doesn't get talked about enough, all of this, that I think Holly goes exactly to with this kind of, friction that can exist with the president is Gina Haspel, who, is unusual in my 20 plus years of covering the CIA, in that she never once sought out a journalist to talk to them or to praise herself or to talk about what the agency was doing. Truly, this person just, was basically a ghost for much of her career, became the director, and is now back in ghost world again. She kind of made it her priority to, keep the agency's head down, metaphorically, so that it didn't get shot off by the president. And she knew not to get crosswise with him. But when there were instances where she really felt that the integrity of the agency was on the line, or the integrity of intelligence, she did stand up, right? She objected to Ratcliffe declassifying this Clinton memo. She told the administration, if you appoint that she said, you will absolutely not make C Patel the deputy director. I will quit if you try. It was also the second time, actually, she threatened to quit. The first time being she almost tanked her own nomination. So there are times when I think Trump did force people to do extraordinary things. But in the main, yeah, I mean, the CIA exists to, within, the law to support the president's policies. And I ended my story by pointing that out. And I said, the question that's going to really, hang over his nomination hearing is how far he will go to support the president and not his policies. All CIA directors are there to support the policies of the president, but to support his politics, his prejudices, his vendettas. I mean, that is really the question. Is he there to kind of be the person carrying out the war on the deep state?
And do you have a sense of the answer to that question? I mean, you ended your story by saying he's the one of these people with actually a track record of doing it. But you also ended a little ambiguously because you said there are limits for him.
Yeah.
He refused to get involved in the in validating the 2020 nonsense. So is your sense that this is a lawyer with a client, but there's a sense of reasonable limits of the advocacy that you will do on behalf of the client? Or is this a situation where your instinct is realistically there are no limits?
No, I think it's the former. I think he has limits. I don't think he'll break the law for Donald Trump. Now, you could query whether or not it would be breaking the law if the president tells you to do something and he has immunity presumptively, and we cross that bridge when you come to it. But I don't think he'll break the law. I don't think that he would wreck his own reputation, which is why he was not willing to accept Trump's offer to be attorney general in 2020, because he knew that he would have to advocate that the election was fraudulent, and he didn't appear to believe that. He certainly did. He had told Trump that there was no foreign interference with voting machines and something that affected the outcome of the election. And he knew that Trump would essentially make him make that argument. So yeah, he does have limits, but to me, it's like that's just sort of an asterisk on, when you're talking about someone who is also willing to go and declassify information that has absolutely zero intelligence value, and the only thing it does is expose sources and methods of intelligence collection. So I think that his limits are probably more about protecting John Ratcliffe than necessarily protecting the equities of the intelligence community.
I mean, to me,
what's the response been? You mentioned that.
Go ahead, Ben.
Oh, sorry, Holly. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say the macro problem. There's a systemic problem that has no solution, which we've mentioned before, and that is, it's not against the law for the president or his, those he gives authority to endanger national security. I mean, they have the ability to declassify whatever they want. They have the ability to share with foreign governments. They make those decisions. And there's not, again, I've said before, there's no provision in our system for the president of the United States being a counterintelligence risk.
Right, because the president defines the counterintelligence and intelligence interests of the country.
I don't think he'll break the law. He doesn't need to break the law in order to cause damage. That's the problem. And there's no solution to the problem, because you can't. This is a democracy. The voters empower. The voters make those decisions and give the president that power. And the intelligence. It is not appropriate for the intelligence community to protect itself from the president of the United States.
Right. All right. So Shane, what has the response been here? You mentioned before that Mr. Ratcliffe declined your request for an interview. Have you heard from his camp in light of the story? And how? What has the response been more generally?
I've not heard from him or anyone close to him, so zero is the response from Ratcliffe world, which I don't exactly know what to make of that. I'm sure they read the story. Generally, I think the response has been from people who have reached out to me, or I'm just kind of seeing social media comments, is that they thought this is a tough piece, but it's very fair, which I had told his people that it was going to be, because I believe in not surprising people. And I think it kind of like the reaction sort of goes back to how we started the conversation, which is, oh, wow, like this seems like a really important person to pay attention to that no one's really been paying attention to for all the obvious reasons. I think he will, I don't want to say he'll sail through his confirmation. He will be confirmed again, but I think that they will treat him with, he'll get a softer treatment than Tulsi Gabbard will get if she gets a confirmation hearing. Softer treatment from the Senate Intelligence Committee. But yeah, generally the response has been, wow, okay. And some people kind of think, oh yeah, I forgot that guy was in power and he did that. And I think in so many ways it's like, and you mentioned I end the story this way, is we're speculating about people like, what would Tulsi Gabbard do if she were the DNI? What would C Patel do if he were FBI director? What would Pete Hegseth do if he were defense secretary? You don't have to say what if with John Ratcliffe, right? You have a lot of material.
Right. You can do what did he do? What
did he do? And what is he likely to do again? And I think people are reading the story through that lens, which I'm happy about.
Well, I recommend it highly. Please, everybody, read the What Would John Ratcliffe Do story, WWJRD. That was for you, Holly. Let us turn to the subject of the collapse of the Canadian government. Shane, you are more than welcome to stick around.
I will, because I want to know all about this, and I am fascinated.
So, Ev, your prime minister is slated to announce today that he's resigning. What's that about?
I'm not sure. I'm not exactly sure that he will announce that he resigns. It would be the sensible thing to do, of course. Like, there's no question about this. But when you mentioned earlier today that the government was collapsing, it was like, I started Googling, has it happened yet? And for now, we honestly don't know. There's all of these wild takes, probably especially in the United States. So CNN says it's done. If you read Canadian news, it's not as clear. People are saying he might be doing it, but he has.
But wait, should we rely on Canadian news for coverage of Canada? That seems submissive on our part. Shouldn't we tell Canada what their news is?
I mean, it would have influence, and it wouldn't be a terrible thing. I mean,
he has the 51st state, so we might as well start.
So, but if we go back to why all of this is happening, before Christmas, Chrystia Freeland, who was finance minister, resigned.
And who is the only senior member of the Canadian government ever to have been interviewed for a job by me.
That makes her a very important person.
Yes.
Clearly.
We were both very young at the time, but I did interview her for a job at the Washington Post, which she did not get. And just think how Canadian history would be different if Chrystia Freeland had been hired to write editorials by the Washington Post.
Yeah, and she might she could become Canadian Prime Minister because now that she has resigned, Trudeau is expected to resign himself following the crisis that ensued from her resignation, and saying that they fought. The reason why she resigned is that they were fighting against tariffs. Chrystia Freeland, who's known for being a tough negotiator with Trump, wanted to be financially cautious to ensure that she would have leverage during after the Trump entered into power to negotiate with him. And Trudeau wanted to make gifts to the electorate to ensure that he might be reelected. So they were talking about giving $200 checks to people and to make stop during Christmas we didn't have to pay taxes again, to get the electorate to have sympathy for Trudeau. And she didn't want to do this because she refused to do this because she thought it was irresponsible financially, given the debate and the conflicts we would have with the US. And she resigned. And there's also a question of Trudeau possibly wanting to replace her with Mark Carney as finance minister, and telling her that he would do that through like emails. So yeah.
So what happens now that so let's assume that Trudeau resigns today. Does he call new elections, or does he step down and the Liberal Party chooses a new premier, presumably her, or somebody else, and we kind of coast along? What's the immediate consequence of a Trudeau resignation, other than that, people who have crushes on him everywhere are devastated?
He definitely doesn't call a new election. That's not what's happening. Maybe that the other party will. They are talking, like the NDP and the Conservative are talking about making a vote of no confidence, and that would result in an election. Trudeau, in the best case scenario, would resign and prorogate the government. With a prorogation of government, and some people argue that it might not be possible because the Governor General has to agree to a government prorogation, but it's basically just norms and it should happen. So if he resigns and there's a prorogation of government to allow the Liberals to have a leadership race, that is probably the best case scenario. There's also the possibility that he resigns and he puts someone else in place to navigate until there's a vote of no confidence and an election is called. So until that one of the two opposition party declare want to go in election. So yeah, and the other option. No, so yeah, that's it. And if there's a leadership race, probably that it will be Chrystia Freeland against Mark Carney. So the two people who were fighting to be finance minister now will be fighting to be leaders of the party. If there's no leadership race and it's a Trudeau decides who's coming for after him, it is likely to be Mélanie Joly, I think, who's now the head of global affairs. So
foreign minister.
Yes. Yeah, correct.
Okay, so my impression, and I am not a close student of Canadian polls, is that the Liberal Party is kind of toast in the next election, and the neo-Trumpist Tories, which are really not very Tory, but kind of populist Trumpy, are ascendant. Does it matter who the head of the Liberal Party is for this purpose, or is Liberal Party toast a foregone conclusion at this point?
As long as Trudeau is the head of the government, it's toast. Like there's no doubt
toast
about
all the
it.
way down.
Yes.
But what about if Chrystia Freeland? I mean, is she toast too? Is Carney toast? Is it a party problem where these guys are just Kamala Harris's to Trudeau's Joe Biden, or is it a Trudeau specific problem, or don't we know?
We don't know. I think that Chrystia Freeland probably is a Kamala Harris like character. She, like, people are enthusiastic about her, but people would vote for Liberals anyway, so it probably won't make a huge difference. Mark Carney is a different game, but he's highly uncharismatic. He has no charisma at all.
But nobody has ever been held back in Canadian politics by being absent in charisma.
Yeah, Michael Ignatieff really was holding. So, yeah.
Moral of that story, guys, don't be a writer and a journalist who runs for office in Canada. Yeah, okay, fair enough. Shane, Holly, questions for Ev? Audience, questions for Ev?
I'm kind of curious how much Donald Trump's needling of the 51st state and the governor of Canada resonates in Canada. Like, are people paying attention to this, and is that getting picked up in the Canadian press? Because he's delighting himself with it. Like, you can just see him cracking himself up to the degree that he actually laughs. But I'm curious if that kind of debasing of our, neighbor to the north and arguably one of our most important allies is something that Canadians are annoyed by or even are paying attention to.
Yeah, definitely paying attention to. Annoyed, I would say yes to, but I think that some people will go along with it, especially all of the people who are now following Pierre Poilievre. And I come from French Canada, which is a whole different game. I really don't think, like, if it was to happen, there's no way French Canada would follow. Anglo Canada, I've heard from people who have kind of made discussions about that there wouldn't be too much of a uprise if it was to happen. But I don't know if it's just like hypotheses or if it's truly what would happen. So,
Holly?
That's just crazy that Canadians would be. I mean, can you imagine like another country saying like they're going to take part of the United States? I mean,
but I think we're also used to living like up north to you, and we just used your nonsense, and we know that it won't happen. So it might be that too. So like, we're kind of taking
Canada
it with
needs to go to therapy and
what's
get
the French Canadian reaction?
Because
on the one
stand
hand,
up for yourself, Canada. Don't be codependent.
Is pretty the politics are really different from the United States. On the other hand, anything that annoys Anglo Canada usually delights French Canada. So, Donald Trump saying you Canadians, meaning Anglo Canadians, are really just part of us, is kind of the same argument that the PQ has been making since the 60s. So what's the French Canadian response to this?
Can I be facetious a bit?
Of course.
It's written in English, so we don't know about it.
Excellent. All right, guys, we're going to wrap up. Shane Harris, you're a great American, and keep writing about the things we already think we know about and don't, because that way lies greater information. Ev, please monitor the situation for us, because we're going to be back tomorrow, and we're going to have the question for you: did Justin Trudeau resign to begin his long-promised affair with Holly Fletcher, or did he?
Have you Googled him recently, though? He's not as charming as he used to.
Ev, no.
The pains of office.
He's all sad and depressed.
The pains of office will do that to you.
I can make him happy again.
You can call me.
You're into it too, Shane?
I mean, it's going to be a very sad day when this man's not on TV.
There's a competition I see, but I feel like I have a chance. I don't know.
Yeah, he's recently divorced.
Yeah, that's all I need is recently divorced, and that I'm in.
And all right, adventurous.
Speaking of which, I, who am not recently divorced, and have no plans to be,
I may be soon recently divorced. I don't know. My husband.
Once Kevin sees this show, All right, we're going to wrap up. I have no idea who the guest is going to be tomorrow, but I may just have Ev and Alicia show up to talk Canadian politics if we have a dramatic development today. We'll find out. You'll find out tomorrow. Remember, keep the faith. And we're not allowed to have fun anymore. But we are allowed to have like the coolest journalists come talk about their intelligence stories. So to the big boys on big media, eat that.